Hello, friends, and welcome back to r/ProRevenge. Today, we have another brand new set of crazy revenge stories for you. But before we begin, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new video every single day. And the first story is, well, you were warned not to park there. This story happened about 15 years ago, give or take. At the time, I worked for a small industrial railroad in my city that served about 20 different industries along the docks. To get to the docks from the yard where I would pick up the inbound deliveries to the industries cars, we had a mile of street trackage that ran right down the middle of a small street. Numerous bars lined the street on one side with the river on the other side. Because of city regulations, we were only allowed to operate along that span of track between specific hours, typically 11 at night to about 5 in the morning. However, since the bars were open at that time, it also meant that we had to trundle along at a crawl, usually walking pace or just about that, to keep the locomotive on the front end of the movement. Every night I went down that street, there would typically be 2 or 3 people who'd parked too close to the tracks, prompting me to have to get people to move their cars. It wasn't a major problem, just an annoyance, except for one guy. It seemed that every single night I would have to stop about halfway down because this guy would always park his truck at an angle in the street as opposed to parallel parking. There were some angle parking spaces, but they were further down where there wasn't rails in the road. Every single night I'd have to head into the bar this guy owned and bug the guy to get him to move his truck. Most of the time it'd take him a good 30 minutes to an hour to drag himself out and move the thing. This meant, of course, I was losing time that I needed to get my job done. After months of this, I finally decided that I'd had enough, so I decided to have the guy towed. Yeah, that didn't work out as well as I'd hoped. Turns out the guy also had some job with the city or the mayor's office or some friend in either, so no one would dare come out and tow his truck. I think I waited there a good hour before he eventually came out and moved it, even having the gall to flip me the bird as he left. At that point, I decided not only was I totally done with the guy, but if the chance arose, I was going to teach him a lesson he wouldn't soon forget. Nothing physical per se, but just a hard-learned lesson. A couple days later, I found myself heading down the track with a half a dozen heavy cars with machinery bound for the docks. As I rounded the curve and neared the place where the guy always parked, I gently applied the independent brakes on the locomotive. This would slow the heavy ride, but wasn't enough to stop it outright. At least not quickly. I waited until the very last minute, laying on the horn and applying the full brakes, bringing everything to a screeching halt in the middle of the street. As I felt the brakes begin to hold, there was this loud thunk and screeching and tearing of metal as the train simply punted the truck out of the way, tearing the bed clean off in the process. This did not go unnoticed, as a crowd had started to gather out front of the bar when they heard the train coming. I stay in the cab, calling back to dispatch and inform them that I'd struck a parked car, and they needed to get the police and a tow truck out to my location. All the while, I could hear this guy screaming, heard him over the sound of the locomotive no less, at the top of his lungs about how he was going to have me thrown in jail, sue the company, and all manner of things. Locking the doors, I opted to just wait in the cab for the boys in blue to arrive. Eventually, they pop around and start taking statements. I explained the problem, nothing I could do. Well, I could have, but it wouldn't have been a good idea. Simply slam on the brakes due to the cargo I was carrying, and the only reason I hit the truck is because it was improperly parked. I added that the gentleman had been warned about it in the past, that something like this could happen, and had ignored the warnings. The man, for his part, was simply livid, hopping around, yelling at me, yelling at the cops, and just beside himself. In the end, he was ticketed for his bad parking, obstructing the passage of a train, and his truck was totaled. And he ended up on the hook for paying for it. Truck was brand new, not yet paid off, or so I was told. It took about 2 hours to clean up the mess, and I was, per company rules, suspended for a week during the company investigation, but honestly, it was worth it. Didn't have any problems with him from that point forward either. Well done. Especially nice when someone who thinks they're untouchable gets touched by the frisky hands of justice. And our next story. Illegally park and block driveways in our neighborhood and do it consistently while throwing a party? Expect what's coming. 2 years ago, a new family moved into our quiet little neighborhood and began their reign of terror. We've lived here for over 20 years, and except for the past 2 years, it's been wonderful. I love our neighbors, except for this family. This family just sucks. I don't even know where to begin. They're loud, they're dirty, they're obnoxious, their dog barks at all hours, they constantly yell at each other and throw parties well into the night, they steal my older neighbor's paper. They actually trained their Rottweiler to fetch the neighbor's paper. Impressive, but wrong. They throw their dog's poo in other yards. Ugh, so much. They even cut my 80-something-year-old neighbor's prize roses for themselves. Who does that? There are about 100 issues I could write about and how we've all dealt with them, but this past weekend was my own glorious take on it all. Oh, and yes, we tried talking to them, we tried inviting them over, we've done nice things for them, and all we've expected is that they act like decent neighbors. That's never happened. In our neighborhood, parking is scarce. Most of these homes are classic 1950s with single-lane driveways, and parking is limited even on the streets. There's a busy road a few blocks away that has great nightlife and popular restaurants, which means that at times, especially on the weekends, the street can fill up. This family has 4 drivers and 5 vehicles with only enough space for 2 in their driveway at a time. Constantly, they would park and leave their vehicle for days, sometimes weeks, in front of other people's homes. Sometimes leaving their driveway empty for no reason, with all of their cars parked on the road. I kind of believe that, in itself, isn't that big of a deal, except for how and when they would do it. They were intentional about it. All would do so and try to cause the most grief for everyone. And this went on for months. A complete FU to everybody. After months of this and no one retaliating or giving them the satisfaction of how PO'd we were, they started parking deliberately in ways to make it difficult to get out of our driveways. I had to have my husband come out most mornings to guide me so I wouldn't hit their car as I backed out of my driveway. There were also times where they squeezed my neighbor's car on the street to where they couldn't get out. Finally, an older, retired neighbor goes down to the city/police station and inquires about what to do. They found a code or law stating that so much space from the sides of the driveway and yada 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 is required, so we come home one night to find freshly painted yellow curbs outlining every house surrounding this one. A few weeks ago, my husband's car breaks down and he has to get towed. On his way back, he starts talking with the tow truck driver about these a-hole neighbors and their cars. He tells my husband that if these cars are parked illegally, we should call the non-emergency line and they receive a ticket. To call him, he can tow them at owner's expense. It's the law. My husband and him keep talking and even meet up for a beer a few nights later. They're big fans of the Blazers. Rip City. He's a real good guy. About a month ago, we met a couple in our fair city, and it just so happens that the husband is an officer. We were already planning on meeting that Friday night, and when we met, I brought up the a-hole neighbors and their parking. He says that he'll drive through on his shift if he gets time, and if he sees them parked in the yellow, he has no problem ticketing them. Great. He also gets some of his friends to check it out when they have time too. Fantastic. We've been calling almost daily at this point about their cars parked illegally, but nothing was happening. That Saturday night, he sends me a text saying he ticketed 3 cars. I missed that text, so no tow truck, but I kind of figured with the 3 tickets they'd get the idea. They didn't. Off and on all week, it was the same. This past Saturday, the teenage son throws a party and every single one of their guests and them parked in the yellow of someone's driveway or blocked someone out altogether. Obviously, the little crap told all his friends to block our driveway or block our cars in. I sent a text to our officer friend who told me to call the non-emergency line and he'd be the one to look into it. But I'm scheming bigger. I call up the tow truck driver and tell him that there are at least 15 cars parked illegally and all are about to receive parking tickets for blocking driveways and cars. I let him know we're friends with an officer and he and I scheme a little further. We get a solid plan. I call our officer friend back and tell him our plan and also mention that the party is likely going to be filled with underage drinkers. Now, I hate busting parties, but make exceptions for little craps and especially little underage drinking and driving craps. He and I finalized the plan. Here's how it all went down. Officer and 3 of his partners go through the neighborhood citing all of the cars. Meanwhile, our tow truck driver friend has assembled a group of drivers in the nearby grocery store parking lot. Our husband and I make anonymous calls about a possible underage party. The tow truck driver starts at our end of the street, grabbing the cars as quickly as possible. A few alarms here and there, but no way they could hear it in the party. When they approach the house, my husband makes an anonymous call about an underage party in our neighborhood. Conveniently, our officer friend just so happens to still be in the neighborhood, so he and his partner go over to the house to check on it. As they knock on the door, lights go out, music shuts off, and the house goes quiet. At this moment, the tow trucks come in and are now towing the remaining 5 cars right from in front of the home. I just wish I could see the kids' faces inside as they're all having a dilemma about what to do. Do they go out and bust themselves for underage drinking and try to stop their cars from being towed? Or do they just sit and bite the bullet and watch $250 go down the drain? On Sunday, they had 3 cars returned from being towed, and all 3 are parked just shy of the yellow lines. I'll call this a win. My husband and a couple of neighbors also spent Sunday putting up some new cameras. They were all very giddy and loud about it. Something about all the lights in police Saturday made them nervous. LOL. And our last story. Supermarket cashier gets revenge on a Karen. I had picked up some groceries at our local market and was in the checkout line. In front of me was a Karen on her cell phone, loudly complaining to the person on the other end about the lack of choices in the store and the lack of toilet paper. During checkout, she talked trash about the grocery store and its employees, all but ignored the cashier, then stalked off in a huff as soon as she paid. As the cashier began to ring up the groceries, he noticed that Karen had forgotten to take a package of chicken she'd paid for. Barely raising his voice, he called out, "Ma'am? Ma'am? You forgot your chicken." He made no show of looking around, then said, "Oh well, I guess she's gone. Want some free chicken?" Petty revenge chicken tastes good. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video to the end, and I'll see you in the next one.